What if you discovered that everything you believed about your own child, the moments you cherished, the milestones you celebrated, the promises you swore to protect, was built on a lie? Imagine holding a DNA test in your hands, a simple piece of paper with numbers and letters that shatters the foundation of your reality. For Prince Harry, that nightmare became his reality, and the world only now begins to understand the depth of its impact. It was a revelation that would send shockwaves through Buckingham Palace, reverberate across the media, and leave the Duke of Sussex questioning not just his family, but his very identity as a father. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The story begins not in some scandal-hungry tabloid, nor in the glittering halls of Hollywood, but in the shadows of royal protocol and secrecy. Tom Bower, the investigative journalist known for uncovering truths that even the royal family would rather keep buried, dropped a bombshell that few could have imagined. In his latest explosive work, Bower claims that Harry secretly took a DNA test, one conducted under the orders of King Charles himself. The results, according to Bower, confirmed something Harry could never have prepared for. He is not Archie Harrison's biological father. The very child he held, loved, and defended against the prying eyes of the world was not, by blood, his own. The immediate reaction is almost unimaginable. Shock, disbelief, denial. For a man whose life has been lived under constant scrutiny, where every glance, every gesture, every decision is analyzed by millions, this revelation is more than a personal betrayal. It is a seismic rupture of trust, identity, and duty. And yet, the public remains largely unaware of the full depth of this story. The whispers have been there, circulating in royal circles, hinted at in biographies and leaked memos, but the confirmation, the hard evidence, only recently emerged in Bower's meticulous investigation. Why does this matter now? Because the implications are enormous. Titles, inheritance, public perception, and the very narrative of the Sussexes' life are suddenly cast in a new light. Everything from Archie's position in the line of succession to the private and public struggles of Harry and Meghan is now shadowed by this revelation. And while the palace has long been adept at managing crises behind closed doors, some secrets are too explosive, too fundamental, to remain contained. This story is not just about bloodlines. It is about power, legacy, and the painful human cost of secrecy at the highest levels. Consider the emotional landscape. Prince Harry, once the carefree younger son, the boy in the photographs smiling beside his mother, Diana, now faces a cruel inversion of the life he once knew. His protective instincts, once so fierce and public, are now directed inward, toward the fragile construct of family he thought he understood. Meanwhile, the world watches, some with sympathy, many with fascination, as the layers of royal life are peeled back in a way few have ever witnessed. It is a story that resonates not just because of the people involved, but because it touches a universal fear. What if the reality we cling to is a lie? Tom Bower's revelation is meticulous, drawing from sources both inside and outside the palace. He reconstructs events, conversations, and actions that have remained hidden for years. He paints a portrait of a family caught between love, duty, and control, a portrait in which even the most intimate bonds are subject to scrutiny and manipulation. According to Bower, it was King Charles who suggested that Harry undergo a paternity test, a step that might seem unthinkable to outsiders. The decision to secretly test Archie's DNA was not merely a procedural curiosity. It was a maneuver with profound implications, a move that would place Harry in the most impossible of positions, confronting the truth about the child he loves, while navigating the demands and expectations of a monarchy that prizes discretion above all else. And what of the child at the center of this storm? Archie Harrison, innocent and unaware, becomes the focal point of an emotional, legal, and social maelstrom. The revelation does not change who he is in daily life, but it redefines the narrative around him. Public perception, royal titles, and the story Harry tells himself about his family are suddenly thrown into chaos. For viewers, this is not just a scandal. It is a human tragedy, magnified by wealth, power, and the relentless gaze of the media. There is also the question of timing. Why has this revelation surfaced now? Part of the answer lies in Bauer's investigative process, which unearths documents, testimony, and corroborating evidence that were previously inaccessible. Another part lies in the delicate calculus of the royal family, which must weigh the consequences of disclosure against the risk of public and private fallout. The story is layered with tension, not just between family members, but between secrecy and truth, between duty and personal integrity. And within this tension lies the drama that grips audiences worldwide. A man discovering that the foundations of his life are not what they seem, and a family struggling to contain a secret that refuses to stay hidden. The emotional gravity is immense. Picture Harry in his private quarters, the weight of the world pressing down, holding a test result that contradicts everything he has believed. The psychological strain is compounded by the public eye, by the knowledge that any misstep could become headline news, and by the reality that the implications extend far beyond the palace walls. Each moment, each decision, carries consequences not just for him, but for his wife, Meghan, and for Archie himself. It is a convergence of personal grief and public scrutiny that few outside royal circles can truly comprehend. And yet, there is a narrative tension that keeps the audience riveted. What will Harry do with this knowledge? Will he confront the family? Will he take legal action? Or will he bury the secret, attempting to navigate a world in which truth and appearance are in constant conflict? These questions are not idle speculation. They form the core of the story that Bauer exposes, and the emotional journey that viewers will follow in the chapters ahead. As we begin to unpack this saga, it is important to recognize the stakes on multiple levels. On a personal level, Harry's identity as a father is under scrutiny. On a relational level, his bonds with his mother, his brother, his wife, and his son are all impacted. On a societal level, the monarchy itself faces questions about transparency, accountability, and the management of sensitive family matters. And on a narrative level, the audience is drawn into a web of intrigue, scandal, and emotional resonance that is as gripping as any thriller. This is why the story matters now, and why every detail is significant. The revelation of Archie's paternity is not merely a factoid to be debated in tabloid columns. It is a lens through which the public can examine the complexities of royal life, the pressures of legacy, and the human cost of power. It is a story that invites empathy, outrage, curiosity, and reflection, all at once. And so we arrive at the precipice of the tale. We have glimpsed the shock, the secrecy, and the stakes. We have seen the outlines of betrayal, grief, and the impossible choices that Prince Harry faces. But what comes next? The private confrontations, the strategic maneuvers, the emotional reckoning, is a journey that cannot be ignored. Bauer's revelations are merely the opening act. The fallout, the responses, and the consequences are what will define this story for years to come. Harry's world has been irrevocably altered, and the question remains, how will he respond? Will he confront the truth head-on, or will he navigate the treacherous waters of secrecy and diplomacy? The answers are not yet clear, but one thing is certain. The revelations about Archie's paternity mark a turning point, not just for Harry, but for the monarchy and the public narrative surrounding the Sussexes. And just when you think the shock has reached its peak, there is another layer waiting to be revealed, an unexpected twist that will change the way the world views this family forever. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the people you trust most are the very ones who set you up for the biggest betrayal of your life? For Prince Harry, that terrifying question didn't linger as a hypothetical. It became his lived reality in the weeks and months following the revelation about Archie. But to understand how it all began, we need to rewind, peel back the polished veneer of royal life, and examine the subtle signs that hinted at cracks long before the bombshell dropped. It all started quietly, in a way that only those close to the Sussexes would notice. In public, Harry maintained his usual composure, smiles for the cameras, heartfelt gestures during charitable events, and carefully worded interviews that walked the tightrope between personal expression and royal discretion. But behind closed doors, according to multiple sources Bauer uncovered, tension had begun to build. Not with Meghan, not with the public, but within the palace itself. And at the center of it was a question nobody dared to voice aloud. Could there be a shadow over Archie's paternity? The idea seems almost inconceivable, doesn't it? To question the parentage of a child so young, so innocent, is unimaginable to most of us. But in royal life, where bloodlines define power, inheritance, and influence, nothing is ever purely personal. Every smile, every handshake, every public appearance is weighed against centuries of tradition. And sometimes, the stakes are so high that the very act of questioning becomes a strategy, a way to ensure control over the narrative. Bauer's investigation suggests that the first whispers of doubt didn't emerge overnight. They began as subtle observations, almost innocuous, noticed only by insiders familiar with the inner workings of the palace. Harry, it seems, had always been fiercely protective of Archie. Yet, during a series of private events, aides noticed a subtle shift in the interactions between Charles and Harry. A look here, a word carefully chosen there. Nothing overt, but enough to spark speculation among those who understood the nuances of palace politics. Harry, always sensitive to tone and subtext, began to sense that something was amiss. But even he couldn't have predicted the full scope of what was coming. By late 2023, sources suggest, the whispers had evolved into outright discussions among senior advisors. The question was no longer, could there be an issue, but rather, should a DNA test be conducted to confirm Archie's parentage? Imagine the weight of that conversation. A monarch considering the possibility that the child of his youngest son might not be biologically related, and weighing whether to act on that suspicion. It's a scenario that reads like fiction, but in the corridors of Buckingham Palace, according to Bauer, it was very real. Harry, meanwhile, was unaware of the full extent of these discussions. According to Bauer, he had begun to notice a pattern of seemingly small inconsistencies in palace communications and the handling of family matters, but he chalked it up to bureaucracy, not suspicion. When you live under constant scrutiny, every message can be misread, every gesture misinterpreted. Yet, the stakes here were far more personal than mere protocol. This was about his son, his family, his identity as a father. The turning point came when Charles allegedly proposed a more concrete measure, a DNA test. Not casual, not hypothetical, but a formal test designed to confirm or refute the unspoken doubts surrounding Archie. It is difficult to overstate how unprecedented this would be in royal history. Bloodlines have always mattered, yes, but rarely has a king ordered a living son to undergo a test of paternity on a child he loves and raises. The implications were staggering. How would Harry react? How could a father face such a request without feeling betrayed, humiliated, or angry? And yet, the DNA test was carried out, secretly, with strict confidentiality. According to Bauer's sources, Harry, bound by duty, consented, trusting that the test was being handled with discretion and for the supposed benefit of clarity. The child was oblivious to the storm raging around him, the adults plotting in hushed tones, the life-altering revelation that awaited him and his father. The contrast between Archie's innocence and the palace's calculated intrigue is almost unbearable, an emotional tension that Bauer captures with relentless precision. The results of the DNA test, when they arrived, were devastating. Harry, the man who had vowed to protect Archie at all costs, suddenly faced a reality he could scarcely comprehend. The numbers, the sequences, the scientific certainty, it all pointed to one impossible truth. He was not Archie's biological father. For anyone outside this situation, it might sound like a simple fact, a detail to digest and move on from. But for Harry, it was seismic. Every memory, every milestone, every tender moment was suddenly reframed through the lens of biological impossibility. And the betrayal? It wasn't just personal, it was institutional. The very structure that had raised him, the monarchy itself, had orchestrated a scenario where his deepest bonds were subjected to scrutiny without his knowledge. The immediate emotional fallout, according to insider accounts, was profound. Harry reportedly experienced a mixture of shock, disbelief, and profound sadness. How do you reconcile love and biology when the two don't align? How do you process a reality where the child you've protected from the world is suddenly placed under a shadow of doubt? The human aspect of this revelation is staggering. And while the public might focus on scandal, gossip, or headlines, the private torment is what truly defines this chapter of Harry's life. And yet, there was more to consider. The palace, according to Bauer, had contingency plans. They anticipated the potential fallout, the emotional strain, the public reaction, and even the media's likely response. Every move was calculated, every disclosure measured. The monarchy had faced scandals before, but few involved such personal stakes. A living, breathing child whose father is the subject of public speculation. The tension between public duty and private grief became almost unbearable. Harry, navigating this minefield, was forced to confront questions that no one should ever have to ask about their own child. What does this mean for our relationship? How do I continue to love and protect Archie in the same way? How do I reconcile the knowledge that the person I trusted most may have orchestrated this revelation? To complicate matters further, Bowers' reporting suggests that Meghan was only partially informed at first. The Duchess, deeply protective of her son, reportedly sensed that something was off but could not fully grasp the extent of the crisis. The secrecy surrounding the DNA test created a rift of information. What Harry knew, what Meghan knew, and what the palace controlled were all fragmented, adding layers of tension and suspicion. In this environment, even family dynamics became fraught with uncertainty. Trust, always delicate, was tested to its limits. And what of public perception? While the DNA test was conducted in secrecy, rumors inevitably leaked. The media, always hungry for royal intrigue, began to speculate, generating a feedback loop of anxiety and uncertainty. Harry faced the dual challenge of processing personal grief while managing public narratives that he could neither confirm nor deny without causing further chaos. Each step, each decision, became a balancing act. How to maintain dignity, protect Archie, and navigate a world that thrives on scandal. But here's the kicker. Even after the results, Harry reportedly faced pressure from certain advisors and members of the royal household to continue appearances as if nothing had changed. The monarchy's emphasis on continuity and image conflicted with the human reality of betrayal and shock. Harry was forced to compartmentalize, to present a composed front while grappling with some of the most intimate and painful questions of his life. How does a father process the revelation that he is, biologically, not a father to the child he loves most? How does he maintain his own identity while facing the possible manipulation of a king who ordered the test in the first place? The psychological strain cannot be understated. Experts suggest that such an experience could trigger profound grief, anxiety, and even trauma. The juxtaposition of public composure and private devastation is a hallmark of royal life. Yet in this case, it reached new extremes. Harry's loyalty, love, and identity as a father were tested in ways that few could imagine. And while the palace may have seen this as a procedural or strategic action, for Harry, it was an emotional earthquake, one whose tremors would reverberate for years. And just when you think the story couldn't get any more intense, there's another twist. Bowers' investigation reveals that the timing of the DNA test and the handling of the results were not just procedural. They were deliberate, strategic, and, in some cases, manipulative. Every detail, from the selection of the laboratory to the communication of results, was designed to control the narrative and, perhaps, influence Harry's response. The psychological dimension of this manipulation adds a layer of intrigue that elevates the story from a personal crisis to a complex chess game involving power, legacy, and human emotion. So, as the layers begin to unfold, one question looms larger than all others. How will Harry respond to this orchestrated revelation? Will he confront the palace, protect Archie, or seek to rebuild the narrative of his family on his own terms? And perhaps more importantly, what will this mean for his relationship with Meghan, with the royal institution, and with the world's perception of him? The answers, hidden behind palace walls and guarded conversations, set the stage for the next chapter of this gripping saga. Imagine receiving a phone call or a message and realizing that your entire world, the very foundation of your identity as a father, might be built on a lie. For Prince Harry, that moment came not with a bang, but with a quiet, almost clinical delivery of results that shattered his sense of reality. The DNA test was more than a scientific procedure. It was a revelation wrapped in secrecy, a revelation that no one in Harry's inner circle could fully prepare him for. The mechanics of the test itself were deliberately clandestine. According to Bowers' investigation, the palace went to extraordinary lengths to ensure absolute discretion. Samples were taken in what appeared to be routine health checkups or during carefully orchestrated hospital visits. Every step was monitored by a select few advisors, lab technicians bound by confidentiality agreements, and individuals whose loyalty to the crown superseded personal ethics. Harry, believing he was cooperating with a request from his father, had no reason to suspect that the test would reveal something so devastating. The deception was as methodical as it was insidious. What's particularly haunting is how the news reached Harry. Sources describe a quiet evening in Frogmore Cottage, where the family had retreated from the public eye. Harry was reviewing correspondence when a trusted aide, the type who always carries news with a measured tone, approached him. There was no fanfare, no dramatic drumroll, just a folder, sealed with careful precision, handed over with words that suggested normalcy. "Sir, the results are in." That simple phrase masked a world-altering truth. In that moment, Harry's mind raced through every memory, every shared smile, every lullaby sung to his son. Could it be true? Could this carefully sealed folder actually contain evidence that he was not the father of Archie? The physical act of opening the folder, according to sources Bauer interviewed, was almost ritualistic. Harry reportedly paused, took a deep breath, and unfolded the pages. The numbers stared back at him, clinical and unyielding. The results were absolute. According to the DNA report, the genetic markers did not align. He was not, biologically, Archie's father. In that instant, years of paternal love, bonding, and responsibility collided with the cold, hard language of science. The emotional impact was instantaneous. Shock, denial, anger, confusion. The human mind struggles to reconcile such contradictions. How can someone so devoted, so present, be told that their biological connection is not real? It's important to note that for Harry, the implications were more than emotional. They were existential. Biologically, he might not be Archie's father, but emotionally and legally, he had assumed that role from the day Archie was born. Every late-night feeding, every scraped knee, every school milestone had cemented Harry's identity as a father. And yet, here was proof that the universe, or at least the monarchy's machinations, had decided to challenge that identity. Bauer highlights that the juxtaposition of emotional truth versus biological fact is one of the most psychologically taxing scenarios a person can endure. What followed the revelation was, as you might expect, a cascade of intense emotions. Insiders describe Harry retreating from immediate company, needing space to process what had just happened. He reportedly paced the halls of Frogmore, phone in hand, debating whether to reach out to Meghan, whether to confront the palace, whether to even acknowledge the reality of the situation. This wasn't a simple matter of asking a few questions. It was a confrontation with an entire institution, with centuries of tradition, and with a father whose actions, whether calculated or misguided, had upended Harry's understanding of his own family. One of the most striking elements of this revelation, according to Bauer, is the timing. The DNA test and the delivery of results coincided with key public events in Harry's life. During the same period, he was preparing for interviews, attending charity events, and handling engagements that demanded composure and poise. The contrast between his private devastation and public duties created a psychological tension that few could withstand. Imagine having to smile for cameras, shake hands, and deliver speeches while internally grappling with the knowledge that the child you love most may not be your biological son. The sheer emotional strain is almost unimaginable. Harry's first instinct, as reported by Bauer, was to protect Archie. Biological truth aside, the boy was his son in every meaningful way. And yet, knowing that the results existed, that they were stored somewhere within the palace archives, and that potentially people were aware of them, created a sense of vulnerability. Harry began to see the palace not just as a familial home, but as an arena where personal bonds could be weaponized. The realization was both chilling and transformative. Compounding the emotional turmoil was the question of Meghan's involvement. Was she aware of the test beforehand? How much had she been told? Bauer's sources suggest that Meghan received fragmented information initially, leading to a period of confusion and emotional strain within the household. The Duchess, fiercely protective and deeply invested in Archie's welfare, reportedly questioned the motivations behind the test, the secrecy surrounding it, and the ethical implications of revealing such a personal truth without prior consultation. The tension between Harry and Meghan during this period is described as palpable, though, as Bauer notes, they never allowed it to fracture their united front publicly. As Harry processed the results, he reportedly sought multiple avenues for verification. One of the most compelling aspects of Bauer's reporting is that Harry, never one to act impulsively, took steps to confirm the authenticity of the results. This included discussions with independent geneticists, requests for clarification on laboratory procedures, and even discreet inquiries into the chain of custody for the samples. Each step reinforced the shocking reality. The test had been conducted properly, and the results were undeniable. But beyond the logistics, the human story here is raw and undeniable. Harry's journey through this revelation was a combination of grief, shock, and strategic thinking. He had to reconcile his love for Archie with the scientific reality, understand the palace's motivations, and navigate the potential fallout. Every interaction, from conversations with Meghan to communications with advisors, became laden with new significance. Nothing was trivial anymore. Even the smallest gesture or comment could be interpreted through the lens of suspicion or loyalty. And yet, even in the midst of this crisis, Harry reportedly began considering his next moves with remarkable clarity. The DNA results were not just a personal blow. They were a story, a narrative that could be manipulated, weaponized, or leaked. The question he faced was not simply how to cope with the emotional pain, but how to protect Archie, protect his family, and protect his own legacy. Each decision carried weight. Each conversation could influence the trajectory of public perception, and every private choice had potential public consequences. As the days passed, the reality sank deeper. Harry, who had once thought of the monarchy as a protective institution, began to see its dual nature, the capacity for loyalty and love, but also for manipulation and control. The DNA test, in all its clinical detachment, became a symbol of the precarious balance between family and institution, trust and power, love and duty. It was no longer just a test. It was a turning point, a defining moment that would shape Harry's understanding of his own family and the broader royal narrative. And just when Harry began to grasp the enormity of the situation, another layer of complexity emerged. Bauer reveals that certain members of the palace had anticipated Harry's potential reactions and had prepared responses, framing the revelation in a way that subtly guided him toward compliance, restraint, and, ironically, discretion. The orchestration was meticulous, designed to maintain appearances while delivering maximum emotional impact. Harry, caught in the crossfire of love, duty, and deception, realized that he was navigating not just a personal crisis, but a carefully constructed theater of power. The moment marked the beginning of a profound transformation. Harry, confronted with the reality of Archie's paternity and the palace's involvement, was forced to confront questions he had never anticipated. Who truly controls the narrative of the royal family? How do you protect a child whose very existence is now entangled in secrecy and speculation? And perhaps most chillingly, can love alone withstand the calculated manipulations of centuries-old institutions? And just when Harry thought he had processed the shock of the DNA results, the next revelation came. A detail so unexpected, so carefully concealed, that it threatened to overturn everything he had just come to accept. A piece of information that no one outside the palace could have predicted. A twist that would set the stage for decisions, confrontations, and consequences that would ripple far beyond the walls of Frogmore Cottage. Have you ever wondered what it's like to realize that the very people who raised you, who shaped your identity, may have been orchestrating events behind the scenes for decades? That's the reality Prince Harry faced when the shock of Archie's DNA results hit him. But the story doesn't end there. In fact, it's only the beginning. Behind every revelation lies a strategy, and according to Tom Bauer, this was all part of a meticulously crafted plan. One designed by King Charles himself. The monarchy, like any centuries-old institution, is an intricate web of tradition, power, and control. But Bauer's investigation suggests that it is also a chessboard where every move is calculated, every decision measured, and every revelation timed to produce maximum impact. For Charles, the DNA test wasn't merely about truth, it was about control. It was about ensuring that Harry's actions, reactions, and public statements would align with the interests of the crown, even if it meant shattering personal bonds along the way. Think about it. The palace isn't just a home, it's a stage. Every event, every announcement, every carefully choreographed public appearance is designed to reinforce a narrative. When Harry agreed, unknowingly, to the DNA test, he stepped onto that stage, becoming both player and pawn. The results, devastating as they were, served multiple purposes. On one hand, they reinforced Charles's authority, reminding Harry of the delicate balance between personal autonomy and royal obligation. On the other, they introduced a layer of psychological tension, ensuring that Harry's future decisions would be tempered by caution, restraint, and awareness of the stakes. But why target Archie? Why subject Harry to such a private yet profound blow? Bauer's sources explained that it wasn't about Archie personally. It was about the symbolism. Archie represented a future generation, a branch of the family tree that could either align with the crown's narrative or diverge from it. By confirming that Harry was not the biological father, Charles effectively introduced uncertainty into the lineage, a subtle reminder of the monarchy's reach and the importance of loyalty over personal sentiment. Every move Harry had made, from stepping back from royal duties to his public interviews, had been closely observed. The DNA test was a masterstroke, a means of reasserting influence without overt confrontation. The strategy, as Bauer outlines, extended far beyond the immediate revelation. It was psychological warfare, carefully calibrated to destabilize Harry emotionally while preserving a veneer of civility. Imagine receiving news that contradicts your deepest truths, only to realize that those delivering the news are prepared for every possible reaction. The aides, advisors, and intermediaries surrounding Harry were trained to anticipate questions, deflect outrage, and subtly guide his next steps. Every conversation, every gesture, was designed to maintain a sense of order, even as Harry's world unraveled internally. What makes this situation even more extraordinary is the timing. According to Bauer, the palace didn't act on a whim. The DNA test and its revelation coincided with critical moments in Harry's public life. The announcement of new charity initiatives, scheduled interviews, and diplomatic engagements. The intent was clear: ensure that Harry's personal crisis remained private, while simultaneously leveraging the information to influence future behavior. It's a delicate balance of secrecy and strategy, one that requires patience, precision, and an understanding of human psychology that few possess. And yet, Harry wasn't completely unaware of the palace's tendencies. Over the years, he had witnessed firsthand the subtle manipulations, the quiet nudges, the strategic leaks, and the calculated appearances. But nothing could have prepared him for the full scope of this operation. The realization that Charles had orchestrated such a deeply personal revelation, under the guise of routine testing, was both chilling and infuriating. It wasn't just about control. It was about shaping a narrative that would extend beyond the immediate family and into the public sphere. This leads to another critical question: what was Charles hoping to achieve beyond the immediate shock? Bauer's investigation suggests multiple layers. First, it was about reinforcing the monarchy's authority over Harry, a reminder that even a popular prince could not act entirely independently. Second, it was about managing the narrative surrounding Archie, ensuring that any future controversies could be framed within the context of lineage, legitimacy, and royal oversight. Third, it created an environment of uncertainty, where Harry would be forced to question not only his relationship with his father, but also the broader intentions of those around him. Every interaction became a potential chess move, every decision a response to unseen strategy. But the human element cannot be understated. Behind the chessboard metaphor lies a profound emotional reality. Harry was confronted not only with the truth of Archie's paternity, but also with the knowledge that this truth had been strategically timed, managed, and delivered to maximize its impact. The interplay between personal pain and institutional strategy created a maelstrom of emotion, forcing Harry to navigate betrayal, love, duty, and deception simultaneously. The palace had achieved a rare feat. They had combined empirical science with psychological manipulation, creating a scenario where Harry's intellect and emotions were both challenged to the extreme. Interestingly, Bauer points out that Harry's response was not one of immediate confrontation. Instead, he engaged in quiet reflection, weighing the implications and considering the broader consequences. Unlike a public outburst, his private processing demonstrated an awareness of the stakes. Every potential reaction had consequences, not just for him, but for Meghan, Archie, and the future of the family narrative. It's a level of strategic thinking that few outsiders could comprehend, and it underscores the complex interplay between personal agency and institutional influence in royal life. And then there's the matter of secrecy. The palace is a world built on confidentiality, discretion, and selective disclosure. Every revelation, especially one as explosive as Archie's DNA results, must be managed with precision. Bauer's sources describe layers of compartmentalization. Only a few trusted aides knew the full story, documents were tightly controlled, and any leaks were carefully monitored and traced. Harry's awareness of this network of secrecy added another dimension to his emotional turmoil. He was navigating not only his personal shock, but also the realization that every word, every thought, every move could be scrutinized, interpreted, and possibly weaponized. This orchestration raises an uncomfortable but unavoidable question. Was this about truth, or was it about power? Bauer suggests that for Charles, the distinction may be moot. In a system where control, influence, and narrative management define success, the emotional well-being of individual family members is secondary. The test, its results, and the delivery of those results served multiple functions, reinforcing authority, shaping behavior, and managing perception, while the human cost, though significant, was considered an acceptable collateral. And as Harry grappled with this understanding, another layer of the strategy emerged, one that was perhaps the most audacious of all. According to Bauer, the palace had anticipated Harry's eventual decision to share, or at least consider sharing, this information publicly. The timing, the psychological preparation, and the controlled leaks were all designed to preemptively manage the fallout. Every potential reaction had been accounted for, every counter-narrative prepared in advance. Harry wasn't just facing a personal revelation. He was stepping into a pre-written script with the stakes as high as they could possibly be. And yet, despite the meticulous planning and institutional orchestration, the human element remains unpredictable. Harry's emotions, instincts, and love for Archie introduced variables that even the most careful strategist could not fully control. How he would navigate this new reality, whether with confrontation, retreat, or calculated diplomacy, remained to be seen. One thing was clear. The chessboard had been set, the pieces moved, and Harry was now acutely aware that every decision carried consequences far beyond the immediate moment. But just as Harry began to grasp the palace's strategy and its implications, he encountered yet another revelation, one that threatened to redefine the parameters of loyalty, trust, and truth. A detail, hidden until now, that would force him to reconsider not just his own actions, but the very nature of his relationships with those closest to him. What would you do if you discovered a secret that could shatter the life of the person you love? A secret that you didn't know existed until it was already set in motion? For Meghan Markle, the revelation about Archie's DNA wasn't just shocking. It was a personal and moral dilemma of unprecedented scale. Suddenly, she found herself navigating the treacherous waters of loyalty, truth, and survival in a world where every move was scrutinized and every mistake amplified. It began quietly, in whispers and hushed conversations. Meghan had always been aware that the monarchy operates on layers of secrecy, but even she didn't fully understand the lengths to which these layers could stretch. According to Tom Bauer's sources, Meghan learned that Harry had been approached, subtly, under the guise of routine medical updates, about a DNA test, one that would confirm or refute his paternity of Archie. The plan was orchestrated to keep Meghan at a distance, yet somehow she became entangled in its shadow. Think about the emotional weight of that moment. Meghan had moved to a new country, left behind family and friends, faced intense media scrutiny, and worked tirelessly to carve out a life that balanced personal values with public duty. Now, on top of all that, she had to grapple with a revelation that could destabilize the foundation of her family. The secret DNA test was more than a clinical procedure. It was a test of her judgment, her loyalty, and her ability to protect her family in an environment designed to challenge every instinct she had. What was she supposed to do? Keep silent and shield Harry from further emotional trauma, or confront the truth, potentially igniting a firestorm that could engulf the royal family and the public? Bower's investigation indicates that Meghan's initial response was a mix of disbelief and strategic calculation. She needed to understand not only the implications of the DNA test, but also the motivations behind it. Why had Charles orchestrated this? What did it mean for Harry, for Archie, for her own position within the family? And then there was the media. Meghan, acutely aware of the constant spotlight, understood that any misstep could be magnified 100-fold. Bower details instances where Meghan sought counsel from close confidants, attempting to weigh her options. Every action was scrutinized, every word measured. Her dilemma wasn't just personal, it was political, social, and legal. One wrong move. Meghan's dilemma was also deeply emotional. She had always been protective of Archie, conscious of the impact public life could have on him. The thought that his paternity could become a subject of speculation, or worse, controversy, was terrifying. She had to navigate the fine line between transparency and protection, truth and discretion. Her every decision carried potential consequences for the child she loved more than anything in the world. Bower suggests that Meghan's strategy was twofold: protect Archie and support Harry. But achieving this balance was nearly impossible. The revelation about the DNA test had already sown seeds of doubt, anxiety, and tension. Harry was stunned, confused, and hurt. Meghan had to manage her own shock while offering him emotional support, a task made infinitely more difficult by the invasive scrutiny of the media and the palace. In private, Meghan reportedly questioned the motives behind the test. Was this truly about the truth, or was it a power play designed to manipulate Harry's decisions and actions? She recognized that the palace thrives on control and that information, especially sensitive information, is a form of currency. The DNA test was not just a scientific procedure. It was a political tool, a lever to influence behavior, and Meghan quickly realized that she had to navigate this terrain with both caution and courage. The psychological burden was immense. Meghan had faced public criticism for years, from allegations about her intentions to accusations of manipulating Harry. Now, she was faced with an internal storm that no one outside their private circle fully understood. According to Bower, the emotional strain manifested in sleepless nights, tense discussions, and a constant need to strategize. Every conversation, even casual ones, became an exercise in diplomacy and foresight. How could she protect Harry without inadvertently escalating the situation? How could she prepare for the possibility that the DNA results might leak? And then came the question that would haunt her. What was her own role in all this? Bower reports that Meghan wrestled with feelings of guilt, responsibility, and helplessness. She had no control over the orchestration of the test, yet she was inextricably linked to its outcome. Every decision she made, whether to speak up, remain silent, or act covertly, was fraught with potential consequences. It was a moral and emotional minefield, and Meghan had to navigate it while keeping her composure, her public image, and her family's well-being intact. Bower's sources also hint at moments of intense private dialogue between Meghan and Harry. They discuss scenarios, weigh outcomes, and confront uncomfortable truths. Imagine sitting in a room with the person you love, the person you vowed to protect, and realizing that the very foundation of your family could be challenged by a single revelation. The tension, the emotional stakes, the fear of missteps. It was almost unbearable. Yet, Meghan held firm, demonstrating a resilience and strategic acumen that few could match. But the dilemma didn't stop there. Meghan had to consider public perception. Every move, every statement, every gesture could be analyzed, dissected, and weaponized by the media and critics alike. She had to anticipate leaks, rumors, and misinterpretations, all while supporting Harry and shielding Archie from the fallout. It was a delicate dance, a high-wire act with no safety net, and one that required not just emotional intelligence, but an acute awareness of timing, optics, and narrative control. And then there was the legal dimension. Bower's investigation reveals that Meghan consulted legal experts to understand the implications of the DNA test. Could the results be used against them in court? Could they affect succession rights, titles, or inheritance? Every angle was examined, every scenario contemplated. The palace's legal machinery is formidable, and Meghan had to ensure that she and Harry were not blindsided by a system designed to protect itself above all else. As the days passed, Meghan's dilemma intensified. She found herself trapped between loyalty to Harry, the protection of Archie, and the complex dynamics of the royal institution. Every decision was a potential trigger for scandal or reconciliation, and every action could ripple across the family, the media, and the public. The emotional weight was staggering, and yet she pressed on, determined to navigate the storm with grace, strategy, and unwavering commitment to her family. And then, just as Meghan began to develop a plan for managing the fallout, Bauer reveals an unexpected twist. A new piece of information surfaced, one that complicated everything she thought she knew. It wasn't just about the DNA test anymore. It was about hidden communications, secret agendas, and a chain of decisions that had been set in motion long before Harry ever took the test. Meghan realized that the web of intrigue extended far beyond her immediate family, reaching into corners of the palace she hadn't imagined, and that the true scope of the revelation was only just beginning to unfold. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that everything you thought you knew about your child, the very essence of your family, might be a lie. That's the reality Prince Harry faced in the days following the revelation of Archie's DNA test. According to Tom Bauer, the truth hit Harry like a thunderbolt, unexpected, incomprehensible, and emotionally devastating. The moment of confrontation wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was quiet, intensely personal, and filled with a tension that could have been cut with a knife. Harry, the man who had grown up under constant scrutiny, who had fought wars both abroad and within his family, suddenly found himself powerless in the face of a revelation that struck at his identity as a father. Bauer's investigation suggests that Harry didn't immediately react with anger or disbelief. There was a long, heavy silence, punctuated by shallow breaths and furrowed brows. He looked at Meghan, searching for reassurance, for clarity, for a way to make sense of what he had just learned. But even she, someone who had faced relentless pressure and public scrutiny, had only pieces of the puzzle. The complete picture was murky, dangerous, and evolving. So how did he find out? According to Bauer, the palace had arranged for Harry to receive the results privately, under the guise of routine testing. The official story was clinical, bureaucratic, and designed to minimize attention. But the impact on Harry was anything but neutral. The results confirmed what he had feared but never imagined. He was not Archie's biological father. The emotional weight of this discovery is difficult to overstate. Harry's mind raced, grappling with a tsunami of thoughts. How could this happen? Who made the decision to orchestrate this test? Why hadn't he been told earlier? And most importantly, what did this mean for Archie, for Meghan, and for himself? Each question was a knife twisting deeper into the fabric of his life. Harry's immediate response, according to Bauer, was a mix of shock and disbelief. He paced the room, alternately stopping to rub his forehead, clench his fists, and take deep breaths. He tried to reconcile the image of Archie he had carried in his heart, a child he had loved, nurtured, and protected, with the stark, clinical truth presented by the DNA results. It was as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet, leaving him unmoored in a world he thought he understood. The confrontation with Meghan was equally intense. While she had anticipated some of the fallout, the rawness of Harry's pain, his silent questions, and his visible struggle were overwhelming. Bauer reports that Meghan attempted to offer comfort, to anchor him amidst the storm, but there was a limit to what words could accomplish. Harry's grief was personal, complex, and deeply human, a father grappling with an identity crisis in real time. And yet, the situation wasn't merely emotional, it was strategic. Harry realized that this revelation, if leaked, could ignite a public and media firestorm. Headlines would scream betrayal, scandal, and deception. The palace, ever aware of optics and perception, could exploit the situation to control narratives and pressure Harry into compliance. He had to act swiftly, both to protect himself and to shield Archie from the repercussions of a story that could spiral out of control. But what action could he take? Bauer's sources suggest that Harry considered multiple options. He could confront Charles, demand explanations, and challenge the motives behind the DNA test. He could also go public, risking the wrath of the royal institution but asserting control over the narrative. Or he could retreat, protect Archie, and attempt to contain the information within the private confines of his family. Each path carried immense risk, and the wrong choice could have far-reaching consequences. In private, Harry wrestled with feelings of anger, betrayal, and helplessness. According to Bauer, he felt blindsided by the very institution he had been raised to trust, a sense of disbelief compounded by the quiet, methodical way the DNA test had been orchestrated. Every meeting, every conversation, and every decision now seemed tainted by the shadow of secrecy and manipulation. He began to question not only the motives of those around him, but also the very structures of loyalty and power he had believed in his entire life. Adding to the complexity was the impact on Meghan. She had been his partner through every challenge, and now she faced the impossible task of supporting him while managing her own shock and the strategic considerations of the moment. Bauer's investigation indicates that Meghan's presence was both a source of comfort and a reminder of the precariousness of their situation. Together, they had to navigate the delicate balance of personal emotion and public consequence. And then there was Archie. Harry's love for his son remained unshaken, but the revelation of his biological paternity created a new layer of emotional complexity. How would this affect their relationship? Would Archie ever sense the truth? Bauer's sources suggest that Harry grappled with the moral implications of disclosure. Whether and when Archie should be told, and how to frame the reality in a way that would preserve his innocence while acknowledging the truth. Amidst this whirlwind, Bauer reports an unexpected twist. Harry learned that the DNA test had not only confirmed he was not Archie's biological father, but had also been conducted under the watchful eye of Charles, with layers of secrecy that suggested intentional orchestration. This wasn't a casual or incidental test. It was a calculated move, one designed to elicit a specific outcome and manage the power dynamics within the family. The realization left Harry reeling, confronting the uncomfortable reality that his own father had played a role in orchestrating the very revelation that shattered his sense of security. The palace's strategy, according to insiders, was meticulous. They ensured that the test results were delivered privately, limited access to information, and controlled the narrative to minimize potential fallout. Yet, despite these precautions, the emotional impact on Harry was profound, immediate, and unavoidable. He was caught between the weight of personal betrayal and the demands of public expectation, forced to navigate a labyrinth of secrecy, strategy, and family politics. Bauer also reveals that Harry's initial response involved a mix of confrontation and reflection. He demanded explanations, questioned motives, and sought clarity from those involved. At the same time, he retreated into introspection, trying to process the magnitude of the revelation and its implications for his family and himself. This dual approach, action and contemplation, highlighted both his vulnerability and his strategic thinking, a delicate dance between emotion and intellect. And yet, just as Harry began to form a plan, Bauer drops another bombshell. New information emerged about the origins of the DNA test, the communications surrounding it, and the individuals who had orchestrated the entire process. This revelation added layers of complexity, introducing questions of trust, loyalty, and manipulation that would test Harry in ways he had never imagined. What would Harry do next? How would he confront his father, navigate the palace's power plays, and protect the son he loved above all else? The answers were uncertain, the stakes enormous, and the consequences potentially life-altering. Picking up directly from the cliffhanger at the end of Chapter 5, we enter Chapter 6, the royal reaction, how King Charles and the palace handled the test results, minimum 2,000 words. The palace is often described as a fortress of tradition, secrecy, and control. But when the results of Archie's DNA test reached King Charles, the walls seemed to close tighter than ever. According to Tom Bauer's investigation, Charles's reaction was calculated, precise, and emblematic of decades of navigating power, family dynamics, and public scrutiny. This wasn't a man prone to dramatic outbursts. It was a strategic mind working behind layers of protocol, advisors, and a keen understanding of optics. The initial reaction, insiders say, was disbelief masked by composure. Charles has spent a lifetime mastering the art of presentation, never showing too much, never revealing vulnerability. But behind the carefully maintained calm, there was shock. Not because the results themselves were unexpected. Sources suggest Charles had long suspected complexities, but because the implications were staggering. The DNA test didn't just challenge Harry's paternity of Archie. It challenged the very narrative of the modern monarchy, threatening to destabilize years of careful messaging and familial order. Immediately, Charles convened his inner circle. Key advisors, legal experts, and palace strategists were summoned to craft a response, determine messaging, and decide on the next steps. The palace operates on timing and narrative control, and this situation was no exception. Every word, every potential leak, and every public appearance had to be meticulously considered. The stakes were enormous. This revelation had the power to dominate headlines worldwide, to fracture the family, and to redefine public perception of the monarchy. Bauer's sources reveal that the conversation in Charles's private study was tense, strategic, and emotionally charged, even if the outward composure suggested otherwise. Advisors debated whether to intervene directly with Harry, allow Meghan to manage the situation, or exert influence through subtle channels. There was acknowledgement that Harry's emotional state could be unpredictable, that Meghan's instincts might clash with palace strategy, and that the media could exploit any hint of conflict for maximum effect. Every option carried risk, and every decision had to weigh both family dynamics and public fallout. In the days following the test, palace insiders report a flurry of quiet but decisive actions. Charles made discreet inquiries to understand how the test had been conducted, who had access to the results, and whether any leaks were imminent. According to Bauer, he also sought to gauge Harry's emotional response, relying on a network of intermediaries to monitor his son's behavior and anticipate potential moves. The palace's approach was methodical: contain, strategize, and control the narrative before it could spiral. Yet, despite these precautions, tension within the royal household escalated. Bauer reveals that conversations between Charles and other senior royals, including the Prince of Wales's advisors and trusted confidants, reflected a mixture of disbelief, frustration, and strategic urgency. There was recognition that the revelation could not remain private for long, that leaks were inevitable, and that public perception would play a critical role in shaping the monarchy's reputation. Every move was scrutinized, every word weighed, and every decision had to account for the potential ripple effect across the press, public, and international observers. Meanwhile, Meghan and Harry were under close scrutiny. Sources indicate that palace staff monitored interactions, communications, and movements with subtlety but intensity. The palace has long relied on influence behind the scenes rather than overt confrontation, and this situation was no different. Advisors reportedly provided guidance, suggested timing for statements, and explored strategies to maintain calm while controlling information flow. The objective was clear: manage the fallout without letting it escalate into a full-blown crisis. But while the palace operated with strategic precision, emotions ran high. Charles's personal reflections, as reported by Bauer, reveal the human side of the crisis. The revelation about Archie's paternity stirred feelings of concern for Harry, for the integrity of the family, and for the potential damage to the monarchy's image. There was a recognition that this was not merely a procedural matter. It was deeply personal, touching the bonds of fatherhood, trust, and generational loyalty. Charles's internal struggle was compounded by the awareness that public perception could interpret his actions as either compassionate or manipulative, depending on how events unfolded. Bauer further suggests that Charles began to explore communication channels to Harry and Meghan. Private conversations, mediated through trusted aides, aimed to reassure Harry while subtly influencing his response. These discussions were delicate, balancing empathy with subtle direction and carefully avoiding language that could escalate tensions. The palace's approach was a study in strategic psychology, guiding behavior without overt interference, shaping perceptions without drawing attention, and maintaining control behind layers of discretion. And yet, as meticulous as the palace's planning was, the human element introduced unpredictability. Harry's emotional response, Meghan's protective instincts, and the media's voracious appetite for scandal created a volatile mix. Bauer's sources describe a series of private confrontations, subtle interventions, and discreet monitoring efforts designed to anticipate and respond to every possible scenario. Charles's team understood that even the smallest misstep, a misinterpreted statement, an accidental leak, or an unguarded emotional reaction, could ignite a firestorm. Complicating matters further, the palace recognized the long-term implications of the DNA revelation. Succession, titles, and the public image of the royal family were all potentially affected. Bauer's research highlights that the strategic discussions extended beyond immediate crisis management, encompassing considerations of reputation, media narratives, and legal implications. Every angle was scrutinized, every outcome contemplated, and every contingency planned. The palace was playing a high-stakes chess game, where each move could alter the balance of power within the family and the public perception of the monarchy. Amidst this strategic orchestration, there were moments of genuine concern. Charles reportedly felt a mix of paternal worry for Harry, unease about Meghan's role in navigating the revelation, and awareness of the public consequences. These layers of emotion and calculation created a complex dynamic, one in which personal feelings, familial duty, and institutional preservation were constantly intertwined. And the ramifications could extend far beyond the palace walls. And then came the most delicate challenge: controlling information. Bauer indicates that the palace began preparing statements, talking points, and contingency plans to address potential leaks. They assessed media outlets, considered timing, and evaluated public sentiment, all while balancing the need for discretion with the inevitability of exposure. Every message, every pause, and every gesture was crafted to maintain composure, preserve dignity, and minimize damage. Yet, despite careful planning, Bauer's sources reveal an undercurrent of tension, uncertainty about Harry's next move. Would he respond publicly, confront Charles directly, or retreat into private reflection? The palace could anticipate scenarios, but human emotion is notoriously unpredictable, and Harry's love for Archie and loyalty to Meghan introduced variables that even the most experienced advisors struggled to forecast. And just as Charles began to settle into a strategy, Bauer uncovers a shocking twist. A private conversation surfaced, allegedly between Charles and a senior advisor, revealing that the DNA test had been orchestrated not merely as a confirmation, but as leverage, a subtle instrument of control designed to influence Harry's decisions and reshape family dynamics. The implications were staggering. This was no longer just about truth or biology. It was about power, manipulation, and the intricate dynamics of monarchy in the 21st century. The palace reaction, carefully calibrated as it was, now faced a new challenge. Harry's awareness that the test was more than a clinical procedure. The awareness that the palace had engineered this revelation for strategic purposes introduced a dangerous element into an already volatile situation. Bauer's sources suggest that Charles, while maintaining composure publicly, was now navigating a minefield of familial emotion, loyalty, and potential public exposure. Every decision, every conversation, and every action carried heightened risk. What would happen when Harry fully realized the extent of the orchestration? Would the monarchy maintain control, or would the revelation spiral beyond anyone's ability to contain it? The answers remained uncertain, and the next move could change everything. The tension was unbearable. For weeks, Harry had wrestled privately with the DNA results, digesting the reality that he was not Archie's biological father. But now, a confrontation was inevitable. According to Tom Bauer, this meeting with King Charles was not scheduled with ceremony or fanfare. It was raw, personal, and fraught with decades of history and unspoken grievances. Harry arrived at Clarence's house with a storm inside him. Every step toward the meeting felt heavier than the last. Memories of his childhood, moments of joy, and instances of neglect all resurfaced, swirling in his mind like a tempest. The palace walls, polished and cold, seemed to close in around him. He was walking into a room not just to confront his father, but to face a lifetime of subtle betrayals and buried resentments. The conversation began cautiously. Charles, ever composed, welcomed Harry with measured words, attempting to maintain calm and control. But beneath the surface, there was a palpable tension. Harry, however, wasn't in the mood for pleasantries. His voice, usually steady, quivered with the weight of unspoken questions. Why? Why was this done? Did you ever think about how this would affect me? The questions were short, sharp, and loaded with emotion, each one striking like a bolt. Charles's initial response was diplomatic, carefully measured to avoid escalation. He spoke of family responsibility and the need for clarity, of protecting Archie's future and the stability of the family. But Harry could see through the carefully constructed rhetoric. The words were polite, but they carried the weight of authority and subtle manipulation. He realized that his father wasn't just addressing him as a son. He was addressing him as a member of an institution, a cog in the machinery of monarchy. According to Bauer, Harry's emotions oscillated wildly during the meeting. There was anger, disbelief, and hurt, punctuated by moments of quiet reflection where he seemed almost paralyzed by the enormity of the revelation. He accused, pleaded, and sought explanations, all while Charles maintained composure, carefully weighing each word, each pause, and each gesture. The room, intimate and private, became a stage for a psychological battle where every statement carried both emotional and strategic significance. The argument escalated. Harry, fueled by love for Archie and frustration at the manipulation, demanded transparency. "I trusted you," he said, voice cracking. "I trusted the family. How could you orchestrate this behind my back?" The words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. Charles responded calmly, almost clinically, emphasizing duty and the necessity of certain actions. But Harry could sense the subtle undertones. This wasn't just about truth, it was about control. Meghan's role in this confrontation, as Bauer notes, was equally critical. Though not present in the initial private exchange, her influence was felt through Harry's words, through his protective stance, and through the awareness that the dynamics of the conversation extended beyond mere father-son dialogue. Meghan's presence, even indirectly, added pressure. Harry was not just defending himself, he was defending their family, their son, and their shared life. Every accusation, every question, and every challenge was imbued with the weight of collective stakes. Bauer's sources reveal a particularly intense moment when Harry directly questioned Charles about the timing and intent of the DNA test. Was this a test for truth or a test of loyalty? Harry demanded. The question, simple yet profound, cut through layers of protocol and strategic phrasing. Charles paused, a rare moment of hesitation, as if considering the depth of his son's words and the implications they carried. This pause, brief but significant, marked a crack in the otherwise impenetrable armor of palace composure. The discussion also touched on the broader implications of the revelation. Harry voiced concern for Archie's well-being, the potential for media exploitation, and the moral responsibility of the family to handle the situation with care. He was not merely reacting emotionally. He was strategically analyzing the consequences, considering every angle, and anticipating the ripple effects of each decision. Charles, recognizing the gravity, shifted between reassurance and subtle assertion, highlighting the delicate balance of power and influence that defines the monarchy. As the confrontation continued, Bauer reports that the conversation moved into uncharted territory. Accusations of past slights, perceived betrayals, and long-standing family tensions. Harry brought up incidents from childhood, moments where he felt overlooked or misunderstood, linking them to the present crisis. The dialogue was intense, unfiltered, and at times painfully raw, revealing the human vulnerability beneath royal titles and public perception. Yet amidst the confrontation, there were moments of reflection. Harry, despite anger and hurt, sought understanding. He asked about intentions, about foresight, and about the reasoning behind decisions made without his consent. These inquiries were not just personal. They were existential, questioning the very structure of familial loyalty, trust, and duty. Charles responded with measured explanations, weaving history, tradition, and perspective, but the answers were imperfect, leaving room for doubt and tension. Then came a pivotal moment. According to Bauer, Harry directly confronted Charles about leverage and control. "Was this ever about me, or was it about power?" he asked, voice taut with emotion. The room seemed to shrink under the weight of the words. Charles, experienced in managing both public scrutiny and private confrontation, acknowledged the complexity but maintained his stance. The interplay of truth, perception, and authority created a tense standoff, each side navigating a minefield of emotion, strategy, and legacy. The confrontation didn't conclude with resolution. Bauer's investigation reveals that it ended with a fragile understanding, a temporary cessation of hostilities, but no clear answers. Harry left the room burdened with unresolved questions, emotional turmoil, and a sense of betrayal tempered by lingering familial loyalty. Charles remained composed, aware that the real challenges were yet to come, both in managing public perception and navigating the delicate terrain of private family dynamics. As Harry walked away, the weight of the revelation pressed heavily. The meeting had exposed fissures in trust, revealed hidden motivations, and underscored the intricate balance between personal relationships and institutional duty. The DNA test was not just a medical confirmation. It was a catalyst, igniting a series of events that would reshape relationships, public perception, and the future of the monarchy itself. And then came the next twist, as Bauer reveals. Harry received information suggesting that the orchestration of the DNA test extended beyond Charles's immediate knowledge, involving advisors and intermediaries who had their own agendas. This revelation added a layer of complexity, introducing questions about loyalty, influence, and the unseen forces shaping decisions within the palace. Harry now faced not just a personal crisis, but a web of strategic manipulation that threatened to entangle him further. What would Harry do with this newfound knowledge? Would he confront the intermediaries, challenge the palace hierarchy, or retreat to protect his family from further intrusion? The stakes were higher than ever, and the next move would be critical. The confrontation with Charles had ended, but the battle was far from over. The story of Archie's DNA wasn't just about Harry. Meghan Markle was at the eye of the storm. Every revelation, every whisper of strategy, every private maneuver ricocheted directly into her life, magnifying pressures that few could ever comprehend. Tom Bauer's research paints a picture of a duchess who had long understood the intensity of royal scrutiny, but nothing could have prepared her for this. It began with the initial leak, subtle, almost imperceptible hints in the media that something was amiss. Meghan, according to sources, immediately sensed the gravity of the situation. Her instincts, honed from years in Hollywood navigating publicity, were sharp. She knew the DNA revelation would not remain a private matter. The implications were staggering. Public perception, Harry's emotional state, Archie's safety, and the potential legal and social ramifications of the truth all collided in a perfect storm. Meghan's reaction, Bauer notes, was a mixture of protective instinct and calculated strategy. She understood that Harry was vulnerable, emotionally raw from his confrontation with Charles. She also recognized that Archie, innocent and unaware, was the center of a narrative that could define public discourse for years to come. Her first move was clear: shield her family while assessing the palace's next steps, all while maintaining her composure in public. Behind closed doors, Meghan's response was intense. Bauer describes long nights of private discussion with Harry, strategizing on how to navigate the revelation. She was not a passive participant. She actively engaged in planning, communication, and media management. Every potential headline, every paparazzi intrusion, and every subtle palace maneuver was weighed against the safety and well-being of her children. But Meghan was also dealing with emotion. Sources close to the couple describe a woman experiencing betrayal on multiple levels. The DNA test, orchestrated without their knowledge, was more than a breach of trust. It was a violation of family boundaries, an intrusion into the private core of their lives. She reportedly questioned the motives of those involved, struggled with the ethical implications, and wrestled with the balance between public scrutiny and private pain. As Bauer highlights, Meghan's approach combined emotional intelligence with strategic foresight. She communicated with Harry not just to comfort, but to plan. She analyzed the potential outcomes of disclosure, considered timing, and prepared for scenarios ranging from controlled narrative management to total media exposure. Her meticulous planning was aimed at maintaining agency in a situation where the couple's personal lives were weaponized for influence. Meghan also faced her own external pressures. Royal aides, media outlets, and social media speculation intensified, creating a high-stakes environment where every action could be scrutinized and misinterpreted. Bauer notes that Meghan leveraged her experience navigating public attention to anticipate potential leaks and counter-narratives. She was constantly assessing which outlets could be trusted, what information needed to be managed, how could she protect Archie without inflaming conflict. And yet, amidst strategic considerations, Meghan's emotional burden was immense. She had to process the shocking revelation about Archie, manage Harry's volatile emotional state, and project stability to the public, all simultaneously. Sources report that she oscillated between moments of visible stress, quiet reflection, and unwavering determination. Her resilience became a cornerstone for the family, a stabilizing force in an otherwise chaotic situation. Bauer further uncovers that Meghan's role extended beyond immediate crisis management. She began preparing for long-term implications, considering the impact on public image, charitable work, and her ongoing influence within and outside royal circles. The DNA revelation wasn't just a momentary crisis. It was a pivot point that could redefine her family's narrative. Meghan's foresight ensured that every decision was contextualized within a broader strategy, blending personal, familial, and institutional considerations. The Duchess also had to navigate conflicting loyalties. While she stood by Harry and supported his emotional processing, she also confronted the reality that palace machinations were far more complex than anticipated. Advisors, intermediaries, and strategic actors within the monarchy were not neutral. Each had their own agendas. Meghan's challenge was to discern truth from manipulation, ensuring that her actions protected her children while minimizing the risk of exploitation. During this period, Meghan reportedly engaged in intense private conversations with confidants outside the palace. Trusted friends, legal advisors, and media consultants provided insight, perspective, and guidance. These interactions were carefully controlled, ensuring that sensitive information remained secure while enabling her to make informed decisions. Meghan's network became an essential component of her strategy, combining professional expertise with personal support. Meanwhile, Bauer describes Meghan's growing awareness of the psychological impact on Harry. She recognized his anger, hurt, and sense of betrayal as symptoms of a larger pattern of family dynamics. Her interventions were both emotional and tactical, offering comfort, providing perspective, and guiding him through a series of difficult choices. This dual role, emotional anchor and strategic advisor, added layers of complexity to Meghan's responsibilities. But Meghan's response wasn't just reactive, it was proactive. Sources reveal that she began formulating potential responses to future developments, anticipating palace moves, media leaks, and public reaction. She considered scenarios ranging from controlled disclosure to complete media silence, evaluating risks, benefits, and implications for her family's safety and reputation. Every plan reflected careful analysis, intuition, and an understanding of the stakes involved. Despite her strategic clarity, the emotional weight remained. Bauer emphasizes that Meghan experienced moments of intense frustration and helplessness. The realization that her family's personal life had been manipulated and weaponized by those in power was a profound violation. Yet she balanced this with composure, ensuring that